This is problem 3.1 from Chapter 3 of Brigham and Houston's Fundamentals of Financial Management, Concise 9th edition. This is basically reproduce a balance sheet for this firm. Alright, so given the information up here in the balance sheet, what I've done is reproduce the balance sheet. The current assets, net plant and equipment are given. So we're told that the assets consist of current assets and net plant and equipment. There's no other types of assets. So current assets and net plant and equipment. The total assets are $2.5 million and plant and equipment is $2 million. That means that total assets are 2.5, plant and equipment is $2 million. The current assets must be the other $500,000. Firm has notes payable of $150,000, long-term debt of $750,000, common equity of $1.5 million. Okay, so that's the notes payable, long-term debt, common equity, and the sum of those three items comes up to $2.4 million. That means that the accounts payable and the accruals, where it says the firm does have accounts payable and accruals on its balance sheet, they have to be the other $100,000. That's because assets and total liabilities and equity have to balance. Okay. And then a series of definitions. What is the company's total debt? And Brigham and Houston's fundamental, the Concise 9th edition defines debt as interest-bearing debt. A lot of people use the term liabilities and debt interchangeably. Okay, so careful when you're out there in the real world. For instance, when we look at the debt ratio, that's the total liabilities to equity, and that's the way most people use it. So in the real world, people use the term debt and liabilities interchangeably. This is Brigham and Houston world, so we'll do it their way. Total debt would be notes payable, which is short-term interest-bearing loans, and long-term debt, which are long-term interest-bearing loans. The difference being short-term is under a year, long-term is over a year. Okay. What's the total amount of liabilities and equity? It's the same by definition as total assets. That was given in the problem. What is the balance of current assets? Accounts payable and notes payable are, what is the amount of current assets? We've already solved for that. The current assets, if total assets were $2.5 million given in the problem, $2 million which were net plant and equipment given in the problem, the other $500,000 has to be current assets. What's the balance of current liabilities? Again, we were told that notes payable, long-term debt, and common equity were $150, $750, and $1.5 million respectively. That's $2.4 million. That means that the other $100,000 would have to be accounts payable and accruals. And alright, so accounts payable and notes payable are the current liabilities. And accounts payable are $100,000. What's the firm's net working capital? The definition of net working capital is current assets, and the only current assets are reported in a lump over here, minus current liabilities. And so the current liabilities, $250,000, which is the accounts payable and notes payable. What is the firm's net operating working capital? And the definition of net operating working capital is current assets minus non-interest bearing current liabilities. The only one of those is accounts payable. What's the explanation for your difference between F and G, then operating working capital does not include interest-bearing liabilities. And all that crap's just definitions they give in the first two parts of that chapter.